My name is Audrey Gable, I'm 34 years old, and 2 weeks ago, I came home to find my own stepsister wearing my wedding gift robe in my kitchen. Before I tell you about how I moved them both from my beautiful Austin home into the gutter, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. The drive home from the airport had been quiet. A 2-day business trip to Dallas, a major deal secured for my company, and all I wanted was a hot shower and my own bed. I pulled into the driveway, my reliable old sedan looking out of place next to the gleaming new BMW I knew my husband, Preston, had recently leased. But there was another car there, one I didn't recognize. A sporty little white convertible, parked with a casual arrogance that set my teeth on edge. I chalked it up to one of Preston's colleagues. He was always bringing people from his investment firm home without telling me. I grabbed my carry-on, the familiar weight of it comforting in my hand, and walked to the front door. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A cloyingly sweet perfume, the kind that tries too hard. It wasn't mine. My keys felt cold in my hand as I unlocked the door. The house was quiet, but it was a lived-in quiet. A designer purse was slung over the back of my favorite armchair, a pair of impossibly high heels kicked off near the entryway. My blood began to feel like ice water in my veins. I walked slowly towards the kitchen, my footsteps silent on the hardwood floors I'd picked out myself. And then I saw them. It was a perfect domestic scene. My husband, Preston, sat at our polished oak kitchen table, the Wall Street Journal spread before him, a coffee mug in his hand. At the stove, with her back to me, was a woman. She was humming, stirring something in my cast-iron skillet. And she was wearing my robe. The beautiful, silk robe Preston had given me on our first anniversary, the one I treasured. For a second, my brain refused to process it. It was like watching a movie of someone else's life. Then she turned, and the movie became a nightmare. It was my stepsister, Chloe. She saw me and her humming stopped. The spatula clattered from her hand onto the stovetop. Her eyes, wide and panicked for a split second, quickly hardened into something else. Something triumphant. Preston looked up, his expression not of shock, but of annoyance. Like I was an interruption. "Audrey," he said, setting his mug down with a deliberate calm that was more terrifying than shouting. "You're home early." My voice came out, steady and even. It didn't feel like my own. My flight was changed. I set my bag down on the floor. It made a soft thud that sounded like a gunshot in the silence. Apparently, I'm not the only one who arrived ahead of schedule. Chloe just stood there, clutching the lapels of my robe. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second a hammer blow against my heart. Preston folded his newspaper, a gesture so practiced, so dismissive, it made my stomach turn. He stood up, straightening the tie of his $1,000 suit. He looked like he was about to chair a board meeting, not shatter a marriage. "We need to talk," he said. He launched into a speech. It was clearly rehearsed, every word chosen to inflict maximum damage with minimum fuss. He talked about how our marriage had been drifting, how he needed someone who understood his world, someone with ambition. He said it all without a trace of emotion, as if he were discussing a quarterly earnings report. And then he delivered the final blow. "Chloe is moving in," he said, not even looking at me, but at her. "I'm proposing a new arrangement. A civilized one. You have 2 options, Audrey. You can accept the situation, and we can all figure out a way to coexist. Or," he finally turned his cold eyes on me, "you can leave with what you came into this marriage with. Which, as we both know from our prenup, is nothing." Nothing. The word echoed in the room. He had just erased 8 years of my life, my work, my sacrifices, and valued it at nothing. I looked at Chloe, who was now smirking, a smug little curl to her lips. She was enjoying this. She was savoring my humiliation. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The pain was still there, a hot, sharp thing under my ribs, but it was being encased in ice. I thought about the house, this house that I had paid for in cash through my company. I thought about the cars in the driveway, both leased under my business account. I thought about the investments, the savings, the entire life he thought was his, all of it insulated, protected, and owned by the little hobby he so often mocked. He expected tears. He expected screaming. He expected me to beg. I gave him none of it. I let the silence hang in the air for a moment longer, a thick, heavy blanket of their arrogance and my resolve. I looked at my husband, the man I had loved, and then at my stepsister, the girl I had tried to help. I took a slow, deliberate breath, tasting the bitter coffee and the sweet promise of what was to come. Then, I opened my mouth and said, "All right, Preston," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. "You've made your position clear. I'll be out in 72 hours. His face, so full of smug certainty just a moment before, flickered with confusion. This wasn't the reaction he had prepared for. He expected a storm, I was giving him a dead calm. But to understand that calm, you have to understand the 30 years of weather that came before it. You have to go back to the beginning. My real life, the life I remember, started the day I lost my mother. I was 8 years old. She was sunlight and warm bread and the smell of paint. She was an artist, brilliant and kind, and she filled our little house with color and laughter. Then, a sickness came, a quiet thief in the night, and she was gone. My world turned gray. My father, a good and gentle man, was adrift in his own ocean of grief. We clung to each other, two survivors on a little raft. For 2 years, it was just us. He taught me how to be strong, and I think, in a way, I taught him how to smile again. Then came Diane. She was my father's new beginning, a woman he met through a grief support group. She was nice. A perfectly pleasant, beige-colored person who filled the quiet spaces in our house with chatter instead of color. And she came with a daughter. Chloe. Chloe was a year younger than me, all bouncing blonde curls and wide, blue eyes that knew exactly how to get what she wanted. From the very beginning, there was a strange tension. Diane doted on Chloe, praising her every minor accomplishment as if she'd discovered a new planet. My father, still fiercely protective of his first wife's memory, treated me with a quiet, deep love that felt like a secret treasure. He gave me my mother's old art supplies, her books, her legacy. Diane gave Chloe new clothes and an ever-increasing allowance. We were living in the same house but on different planets. The jealousy started small. In 5th grade, I built a model of the solar system for the science fair. My mother had been obsessed with astronomy, and I spent weeks on it, carefully painting each planet, building a little motor to make them orbit a glowing sun. It was the best thing I had ever made. The night before the fair, Chloe accidentally tripped while carrying a glass of water, drenching the entire project. The papier-mâché planets warped and bled their colors. It was ruined. She burst into tears, apologizing profusely, and Diane rushed to comfort her, shooting me a look that said, "How could you leave your project where she could trip over it?" My father spent the whole night helping me rebuild it, but it was never the same. Chloe won a participation ribbon for a poster she copied from a book. I got an honorable mention. And as I stood there, looking at my sad, lumpy planets, I saw Chloe across the gymnasium. She wasn't looking at her ribbon. She was looking at me, and for a split second, I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated satisfaction in her eyes. It was a pattern that repeated itself through middle school and high school. If I got an A, she'd complain about how the teacher liked me better. If I made the varsity soccer team, she'd suddenly develop a mysterious ankle injury that required everyone's attention. She was a black hole for sympathy, and her favorite target was anything that brought me joy. My father saw it, I think. He'd often pull me aside and say, "You have your mother's spirit, Audrey. Don't ever let anyone dull your shine." But I wanted a family. I craved the easy affection I saw in my friends' homes. So I tried. I helped Chloe with her homework, I covered for her when she snuck out, I pretended not to see the way she'd look at my boyfriends. I was trying to build a bridge to a sister who was secretly trying to burn my side of the shore. Then came Preston. I met him in my last year of college. He was ambitious, handsome, and utterly captivated by the business I was starting to build from my dorm room, designing eco-friendly packaging. He called it brilliant. He said I was going to change the world. He was the first person outside of my father who seemed to see my potential not as a threat, but as an asset. We got married 2 years later in a beautiful ceremony in the Texas Hill Country. My father walked me down the aisle, his eyes glistening with tears. He whispered in my ear, "Your mother would be so proud." As I stood at the altar next to Preston, I looked out at the guests. And I saw Chloe. She was a bridesmaid, stunning in a pale blue dress. She was smiling, a wide, perfect smile for the cameras. But her eyes were fixed on me with an intensity that was chilling. There was no joy in them. No sisterly affection. There was only a cold, hard, calculating envy. It was the same look I'd seen across the gymnasium at the science fair, magnified 100 times. At that moment, a shiver went down my spine, a cold premonition that I quickly dismissed as wedding day jitters. I should have listened to that feeling. It was my own heart, trying to warn me that the greatest threat to my future was standing right there, smiling in my wedding photos. After the wedding, Preston's career took off. He was a rising star at his investment firm, a shark in a tailored suit. My own business, which I officially named Verdant Solutions, was growing too, but in a quieter, more organic way. I started with local businesses at farmers markets, then landed a few regional grocery chains. The work was my passion. It felt like I was honoring my mother's artistic spirit, but with an engineer's mind. Preston had been my biggest cheerleader when we were dating, but once we were married, his tone began to change. My work became my little project. He'd come home from closing a multi-million-dollar deal and ask, "How was your craft fair today, honey?" It was a subtle shift, a slow erosion of respect disguised as affection. He'd pat me on the head when I told him I'd secured a new client, like I was a child who'd just sold a successful cup of lemonade. Meanwhile, Chloe was drifting. She'd graduated college with a business degree but had bounced between 3 different jobs in 2 years, always complaining that her bosses didn't appreciate her vision. One Sunday, during a tense family dinner, she announced she'd been fired from her latest marketing gig. Diane, my stepmother, immediately looked at me. "Audrey, Preston works at that big, fancy firm. Surely he could find a little something for Chloe to do." I felt a familiar pit in my stomach. It was the old dynamic, Chloe failing and me being expected to fix it. I didn't want to. A voice screamed in my head, "Don't do it." But then I looked at my father, who looked so tired of the constant tension. For his sake, I agreed to talk to Preston. That night, I brought it up. "Preston, Chloe is looking for a job. Do you think there might be an entry-level analyst position at your firm? She's a smart girl, she just needs a real chance." He scoffed, swirling the wine in his glass. "Audrey, we're a top-tier firm, not a charity. We hire the best of the best from Ivy League schools. Your sister, she doesn't have the pedigree." His arrogance was infuriating, but I pressed on, appealing to the one thing I knew he couldn't resist, his ego. "I know that. But think about it. You could be her mentor. You could shape her, guide her. She looks up to you so much. It would be a great reflection on you to take someone with potential and turn them into a star." I saw it then. A flicker of interest. The idea of being a kingmaker, a powerful mentor to a young, attractive woman, appealed to him. He stroked his chin. "All right," he said, his voice magnanimous. "I'll see what I can do. But she reports to me. I'll keep her on a tight leash." 2 weeks later, Chloe started her new job. I felt a wave of relief. I thought I had finally done it. I'd helped my sister, I'd eased the family tension, I'd built that bridge. I was a fool. I hadn't built a bridge, I had opened the gate and personally escorted the wolf into the fold. The change was almost immediate. Suddenly, Preston and Chloe had a whole world of inside jokes and shared experiences I wasn't privy to. Dinners became a performance of their professional lives. "Chloe absolutely killed it in the Braxton pitch today," Preston would announce, beaming. "She has a real killer instinct." Chloe would blush and say, "I learned from the best." They were a team. I was the audience. My business, in contrast, became an even bigger joke to him. He'd walk into my home office, see my prototypes and material samples, and say, "It's cute that you have your little arts and crafts project, Audrey. It keeps you busy while I'm out there making a real salary." A real salary. He had no idea. I was already clearing 7 figures in profit, but I let him believe I was making pocket money. Part of it was self-preservation, a lesson learned from my mother's difficult divorce from her first husband before she met my dad. She had trusted him with everything and left with nothing. I swore that would never be me. So every major asset, every investment, the down payment for our house, it was all funneled through my business. Legally, I was a CEO funding a lifestyle. In his eyes, I was a housewife with a hobby. The affair probably started a few months after she began working there. Looking back, the signs were all there. The late nights at the office, the business trips they took together, the way he started guarding his phone like it held state secrets. I was so busy, so focused on landing a national contract, that I explained it all away. I wanted to believe in the family I was trying so hard to build. The sickening moment of realization came about a year ago. I was looking for a document on our shared cloud drive and stumbled upon a folder of photos from a work conference in Chicago. It was pictures of them. At dinner, laughing. At a jazz club, his arm draped around her. And one photo, a selfie taken in a hotel room, Chloe wearing his button-down shirt and a triumphant smirk. My shirt. His shirt. Our life. My world didn't shatter. It simply clicked into sharp, horrible focus. Every little slight, every condescending comment, every shared glance I had ignored, it all made sense. I hadn't just been betrayed. I had personally handed them the knife. I had led the wolf right to my own door. And as it stood there, ready to devour everything I had, I made a choice. I would not be the prey. If you're still listening, please help me out by liking this video and commenting the number 1 below. It lets me know you've given me a like, and that you're with me on this journey. Your support is a huge encouragement for me to keep going. Please, comment with a 1, and then listen to what I did next. After that day, something inside me shifted. The part of me that made excuses, the part that hoped for the best, it just died. It was replaced by something cold, quiet, and methodical. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went into my home office, closed the door, and opened a new file on my computer. I labeled it Operation Nightingale. A nightingale is a small, plain-looking bird, but its song is one of the most powerful and beautiful in the world. I decided it was time for me to start singing. I didn't confront them. What was the point? They would just lie. They'd call me crazy, jealous, insecure. They'd gaslight me until I doubted my own eyes. I had seen that happen to my mother during her first divorce, and I had learned. You don't go to war without ammunition. So I began to gather it. My home office became my war room. I started documenting everything. Every late night, every weekend trip, every credit card charge for a hotel or a restaurant I'd never been to. I set up an alert that forwarded copies of all of Preston's air receipts to a private email account he didn't know existed. Flowers for his star analyst. Jewelry from Tiffany's. Lingerie. The evidence piled up, a disgusting monument to their deceit. They, in turn, seemed to get bolder, their cruelty escalating from passive condescension to active psychological warfare. The first major attack came about 6 months ago. I was finalizing a huge proposal for a national organic grocery chain. This contract was a game changer, the culmination of 3 years of work. The final presentation was saved on our shared cloud drive, in a folder clearly labeled Verdant Do Not Delete. I was scheduled to present it via video conference at 9 a.m. the next morning. That night, Preston came home late, smelling of Chloe's perfume and cheap victory. He was in a foul mood. The next morning, I woke up, made coffee, and sat down at my desk to do one final review. The folder was gone. A cold panic seized me. I searched everywhere. The trash, the archives, every corner of the cloud. It had been permanently deleted. I felt the blood drain from my face. I ran downstairs. Preston was at the kitchen table, reading his paper, The Picture of Innocence. "Preston," I said, my voice shaking. "My Verdant presentation folder, it's gone from the cloud." He looked up, feigning a mild surprise. "Oh, really? That's strange. You know, I was doing some cleanup on the drive last night, it was getting so cluttered. I probably deleted it by accident. I'm sorry, honey." He turned back to his paper. "I didn't think your little craft files were that important." I just stared at him. The casual, dismissive way he said it. The lie was so blatant, so cruel. He knew exactly how important that presentation was. This wasn't an accident, it was sabotage. He was trying to keep me small. He was trying to break me. I felt a hot flash of pure rage crawl up my neck. For a moment, I wanted to scream, to throw my coffee mug at his smug face. But I didn't. I just turned and walked back upstairs. I had a backup on a separate hard drive, I always have backups. But he didn't know that. I spent the next 3 hours rebuilding the parts one had updated, my fingers flying across the keyboard, fueled by coffee and a cold fury. I delivered the presentation at 9 a.m. And I landed the contract. It was the biggest deal in my company's history. When I told Preston that evening, he could barely hide his shock and disappointment. And I knew, without a doubt, that I was at war with my own husband. The second attack was more public, more humiliating. It was orchestrated by Chloe. Preston's firm was hosting its annual charity gala. I was expected to attend, to play the role of the supportive wife. I hated it, but I went. I was standing by the silent auction table when they walked over. Chloe was clinging to Preston's arm, wearing a backless red dress that was both expensive and desperate. She looked me up and down, a fake, sweet smile plastered on her face. Then, in a voice loud enough for the people around us to hear, she said, "Oh, Preston, darling, isn't this your wife? Audrey, right?" She knew my name perfectly well. "It's so lovely to finally meet you in person. Preston tells me you do something with boxes? It's so sweet to have a little hobby to keep you busy while the adults are working." The people nearby chuckled. My face burned. It was a direct hit, designed to paint me as a frivolous, kept woman. A nobody. Preston just stood there, a proud smirk on his face, enjoying the show. I looked at Chloe, at her perfectly made-up face and her cold, empty eyes, and I felt a strange sense of pity. All this effort, all this cruelty, just to try and steal a life she could never build for herself. I just smiled politely. "Design is a fascinating field," I said, my voice even. "You should look into it sometime. It teaches you that the most beautiful structures are built on a solid foundation. Something that can't be easily broken." Her smile faltered for a second. She didn't understand what I meant, but she felt the steel in my voice. They walked away, and I stood there for another minute, my heart hammering in my chest. That night, I went home and called the one person I knew I would need. A lawyer. Not just any lawyer, but the best corporate litigation attorney in Austin. I didn't tell her the whole story, not yet. I just said I needed to restructure my corporate assets for maximum liability protection. It was the first official move in Operation Nightingale. The war was no longer silent. It was about to get very, very loud. So when I stood in that kitchen, with their smug faces staring at me, I wasn't a heartbroken wife. I was a general, and they had just blundered directly into my perfectly laid trap. My calm wasn't shock. It was control. "All right, Preston," I said. "You've made your position clear. I'll be out in 72 hours. I turned without another word and walked upstairs, leaving them in a stunned silence. I could feel their eyes on my back. I went straight to my office, my real office, the command center of my life, and closed the door. My hands were perfectly steady. The emotional part of my brain had shut down, and the logical, CEO part had taken complete control. I sat down in my leather chair and took a deep breath. Then I made my first call. The phone rang twice before a crisp, no-nonsense voice answered. Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was my lawyer. We had been working together for the past 6 months, fortifying the legal walls of my company. She was a shark, just like Preston, but she was my shark. "Eleanor, it's Audrey," I said, my voice low and even. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end, and then I heard the faint sound of typing. "I see," she said. Her voice was as calm as mine. "Are we proceeding with the full protocol?" "Full protocol," I confirmed. "Operation Nightingale is a go. I want an immediate asset freeze on his personal accounts. Everything in the name Preston Hayes. His checking, his personal brokerage account, his 401k. Leave the corporate accounts of Verdant Solutions completely untouched. We don't want to tip our hand." "Understood," Eleanor said. "I'll file the emergency petition with the court within the hour, citing potential dissipation of marital assets pending a divorce filing. It should be approved by morning." "What about the property?" "He's here," I said. "With her. In corporate housing." I heard Eleanor let out a low whistle. "He's making this easy," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "I'll have the cease and desist and the eviction notice drawn up. Standard 24-hour vacate order. We'll serve him with everything at once." "When do you want to do it?" 72 hours from now," I said. "Let them have their little victory for a couple of days. I want them to feel safe. Cold-blooded." "I like it," Eleanor said. "I'll be ready. Stay strong, Audrey." I hung up. One piece on the chessboard moved into position. My second call was to my CFO, a brilliant woman named Maria who had been with me since the beginning. She knew more about my company's finances than I did. She also knew the general outlines of my situation with Preston. "Maria," I said when she answered. "Execute Operation Nightingale." "With absolute pleasure," she replied, her voice filled with a fierce loyalty that almost made me emotional. "Almost. How scorched do you want the earth?" "I want it visible from space," I said. "Start the process of formally documenting all corporate assets. I want a full inventory and valuation report ready to go. The house, the vehicles, the furniture we purchased for the executive retreat. I put a sarcastic emphasis on the last 2 words. I want every receipt, every title, every deed locked and loaded." "Consider it done," Maria said. "They won't know what hit them." I ended the call. The machine was now in motion. All the pieces I had so carefully put into place over the last year were moving towards their inevitable conclusion. I leaned back in my chair and finally allowed myself to feel the silence of the house. But it wasn't silent. Faintly, through the floorboards and the air vents, I could hear their voices from the kitchen below. They weren't whispering. They were laughing. I crept to the vent in the corner of my office and listened. "Can't believe how easy that was," Chloe was saying, her voice giddy. "I thought she'd fight. Scream or something. She just folded. She knows she can't win, Preston's voice replied, deep and smug. Without me, she's nothing. Her little craft blog can't pay for this lifestyle. She's smart enough to know that. Taking the high road is her only move. So, what happens now? Chloe asked. Is she really going to leave? She has to. In 72 hours, this house is officially ours. We can finally start our lives. I felt a bitter smile touch my lips. Our house. Our lives. The arrogance was breathtaking. Then Chloe asked the question that made my blood run cold all over again. Should we change the locks? There was a pause. Then Preston chuckled. After she leaves, he said. Let's not be cruel. Cruel. He thought that was mercy. I pushed myself away from the vent, the icy calm settling back over me. They had no idea. They were two mice, celebrating in a beautiful house, completely unaware that they weren't the owners. They were just pests. And the exterminator was coming. The next morning, I woke up early. I bypassed the kitchen, where I could hear them moving around, their laughter echoing unnaturally in what was still, for the moment, my home. I made coffee in my office and got to work. I wasn't packing my clothes or personal belongings. I was packing my arsenal. I spent hours gathering every single piece of documentation. The original deed to the house, clearly listing Verdant Solutions, LLC as the owner. The vehicle titles, the corporate insurance policies. I printed out 3 years of financial statements, highlighting every major purchase that proved my company, not Preston, had funded our entire life. I compiled it all into 3 identical, thick binders, each with a crisp, clean label, Hayes v. Hayes Corporate Assets. Around noon, they finally emerged from the bedroom. They were acting like they were on a honeymoon. He was in his golf attire, she was in my yoga clothes. They were heading out for the day. As they left, Preston paused at the bottom of the stairs and looked up at my office door. Try not to make too much of a mess with your packing, Audrey, he called out. I've got clients coming over for drinks next week. I want the place to look presentable. I didn't answer. I just listened to the front door close behind them, the sound of their laughter fading as they drove away in the company car. Later that afternoon, the movers arrived. It was a small crew, just 2 men, from a company I used for my business logistics. They knew me as Ms. Gable, the CEO. They had no idea about the drama unfolding in this house. Preston and Chloe had just returned from their day out. They were sitting on the patio, drinking cocktails, when the moving truck pulled into the driveway. I saw Preston sit up, a smirk spreading across his face. He clearly thought this was me, making a big show of moving my things out. I met the movers at the door. Good afternoon, I said crisply. We're just moving the contents of the home office today. Nothing else. They nodded and got to work. They brought in dollies and boxes, moving with quiet efficiency. Preston and Chloe came inside, drawn by the activity. He leaned against the doorframe of the living room, arms crossed, watching the scene with an air of amused detachment. Taking your craft supplies? He asked, his voice dripping with condescension. Something like that, I replied, not looking at him. I directed the movers as they carefully packed my computers, my printers, my filing cabinets filled with patents and contracts. They wrapped my design awards in bubble wrap. They dismantled the large oak desk that had been a gift from my father. Chloe wandered around, picking things up and putting them down, acting as if she were the lady of the manor inspecting the staff's work. She had fully embraced her new role. Her clothes were already mixed in with mine in the master closet. Her makeup had taken over my side of the bathroom vanity. You know, she said, trailing a finger along a bookshelf. I love what you've done with the house. But when it's officially ours, I think I'll probably update everything. Your style is a bit dated. Design is subjective, I said pleasantly, my eyes following a box labeled International Contracts as it was carried out the door. An hour later, my office was empty. The room looked stark and bare. The movers loaded the last box onto the truck and I signed their paperwork. As the truck pulled away, Preston clapped his hands together lightly. "Well," he said, with an air of finality. "That's that, I suppose. Glad we could get this done so amicably." I just nodded and went back upstairs to the empty room. The real packing could wait. I had one more day of their charade to endure. That evening was the longest of my life. They ordered expensive takeout and watched a movie in the living room, laughing and cuddling on the sofa I had paid for. I stayed in my empty office, making a few final calls, my laptop on the floor. Later, as I was walking down the hall to the guest room where I'd been sleeping, I passed the open door of the master bedroom. Chloe was inside. She was sitting at my vanity, the one that had belonged to my grandmother. And she was going through my jewelry box. I froze in the doorway, hidden in the shadows. I watched as she picked up a delicate gold locket. It wasn't expensive, but it was my most precious possession. It had been my mother's. An inheritance of the heart. It held a tiny picture of her and a tiny picture of me as a baby. Chloe opened the locket. She stared at the pictures for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, she snapped it shut. She unclasped the chain and, with a slow, deliberate movement, fastened it around her own neck. She looked at her reflection in the mirror, turning her head from side to side, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. "You won't be needing this anymore," she whispered to her own reflection. "I think it looks better on me anyway." A wave of heat washed over me, so intense I thought I might pass out. It was a violation so profound, so deeply personal, it transcended everything else. She wasn't just taking my husband and my house. She was trying to take my past. She was trying to erase me. I backed away from the door, my hands clenched into fists, my nails digging into my palms. The ice in my veins had turned to fire. The calm, calculating CEO was gone, and in her place was a woman who had just been pushed past her breaking point. 72 hours had been a kindness. Now, it felt like an eternity. Tomorrow couldn't come soon enough. The morning of the third day dawned bright and clear. A perfect day for a demolition. I was awake before the sun, a strange and total calm having settled over me during the night. The rage from seeing Chloe with my mother's necklace had burned away everything else, the doubt, the pain, the sadness. All that was left was purpose. I packed my personal belongings. Not into moving boxes, but into 2 suitcases. The clothes I loved, the books that mattered, the photos of my mother. I worked silently, methodically. I left the jewelry box on the vanity, empty except for a few stray earrings. The locket was still missing. I came downstairs at precisely 8:30 a.m. Preston and Chloe were in the kitchen, acting out the final scene of their little play. He was dressed for work, reading his paper. She was in one of my workout outfits, making a smoothie. They were already looking at brochures for a trip to Bali, spread out across the kitchen island. Planning their victory tour. "Morning," Preston said without looking up. "The 72 hours are up at noon. I trust you'll be gone by then?" "Don't worry," I said, pouring myself a final cup of coffee from the pot. "Everything is right on schedule." Chloe smirked at me over the rim of her smoothie glass. "Don't forget to leave your keys on the counter, Audrey." I just smiled. We sat in a strained silence for the next 20 minutes. Them, rustling papers and whispering about infinity pools. Me, sipping my coffee and watching the clock on the wall. 9 a.m. 9:05, 9:10. At exactly 9:15 a.m., the doorbell rang. Its cheerful, 2-note chime cut through the tension like a knife. Preston looked up, annoyed. "Are you expecting someone? Your movers are coming back?" No, I said, standing up. My movers are finished. I'll get it. I walked to the front door, my heart a steady, heavy drum in my chest. I didn't feel nervous. I felt alive. I opened the door. A man stood on the porch. He was in his 50s, with a tired face and a nondescript gray suit. He was holding a thick manila envelope. He was exactly who I was expecting. I'm looking for Preston Hayes, he said, his voice flat. That's my husband, I said, a little too brightly. I turned and called into the house. Preston, honey. Someone's here for you. Preston appeared in the hallway, his face a mask of irritation. What is it? I'm going to be late for work. The man on the porch extended the envelope. Preston Hayes? You've been served. The words hung in the air. Served. It's a word you see in movies, but when you hear it in your own home, it has a physical weight. Preston stared at the man, then at the envelope, as if he didn't understand the language. He slowly took it. The man nodded curtly, turned, and walked back down the path to his car. I closed the door, leaving us all inside. Preston tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the first page. I watched his face as he processed the words, a fascinating, slow-motion ballet of emotions. First, confusion. His brow furrowed. Then, disbelief. He shook his head slightly, as if to clear it. He read the page again. And then, finally, his face began to suffuse with a deep, blotchy red. Rage. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and wild. He jabbed a finger at the papers in his hand. What is this? He spat, the words coming out in a choked whisper. It's exactly what it looks like, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Divorce papers? He roared, his voice finally breaking free. You're divorcing me? After everything I've done for you? After I generously gave you 2 options? I chose a third option, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. He waved the papers at me like a weapon. This is insane. A cease and desist? What the hell is a cease and desist? It's a legal order, I explained, as if to a child. Informing you that you are currently residing in a property owned by Verdant Solutions. As the CEO of that company, I am formally instructing you to vacate the premises. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. He looked at the walls, at the floor, as if seeing them for the first time. This is my house. I pay the mortgage. No, you don't, I said simply. You transfer money into a joint account every month, and my company pays the mortgage. A company you thought was a little craft project. Chloe had appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the shouting. Her face was pale, her eyes darting between us. Preston? What's going on? Preston ignored her. His rage was focused entirely on me. He was breathing heavily, his multi-thousand-dollar suit suddenly looking cheap and ill-fitting. The powerful investment banker was gone, replaced by a cornered, confused animal. This can't be legal, he shouted, shaking the papers so hard they rattled. I'll call my lawyer. He'll destroy you. You'll get nothing, Audrey. The prenup is ironclad. You'll leave with nothing. He was still shouting, his voice echoing in the grand foyer he thought was his, when the doorbell rang again. Preston froze, his tirade cut short. We all looked at the door. Don't worry, I said, a real smile finally breaking through. I'll get that one too. I believe it's for you. He stared at me, a flicker of genuine fear finally entering his eyes. He didn't understand what was happening. But he was starting to realize that the game he thought he had won had never even started. I opened the door. Standing on the porch, looking immaculate in a steel gray pantsuit, was my lawyer, Eleanor Vance. She gave me a small, sharp nod and then looked past me at Preston. Mr. Hayes, she said, her voice cutting through the air like a shard of ice. I believe we have a few things to discuss. Preston stared at Eleanor as if she were an apparition. He knew who she was. Eleanor Vance had a reputation in Austin's legal circles. She was brilliant, ruthless, and she never, ever lost. Seeing her on his doorstep, representing me, was like seeing a tank pull up outside his office. The color drained from his face. Eleanor Vance, he stammered. What are you doing here? I'm here representing my client, Ms. Audrey Gable, Eleanor said, stepping inside. She didn't wait for an invitation. She owned the space the moment she entered it. She glanced at the divorce papers in his hand. I see you've received the opening documents. Let's consider this the executive summary of your new reality. Chloe, who had been frozen in the kitchen doorway, finally found her voice. Preston, who is this woman? What is she talking about? Eleanor turned her cool, analytical gaze on Chloe. You must be Ms. Chloe, she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. The new arrangement. The way she said it made it sound like something you'd find growing in a petri dish. Eleanor walked past them and placed her leather briefcase on the dining room table, snapping it open with 2 sharp clicks. Mr. Hayes, perhaps you should sit down. You look a little unsteady. Preston didn't move. He was still reeling. This is a joke, he said, trying to regain his footing. A scare tactic. Our prenup protects my assets. This house, my salary, my investments. Eleanor pulled out a thick, bound document. It was one of the binders I had prepared. She dropped it on the table with a heavy, definitive thud. Let's talk about assets, shall we? She said, flipping it open. Let's start with this house. You seem to be under the impression that it's marital property. It is not. She slid a copy of the deed across the table. It was purchased on May 12th, 4 years ago, by Verdant Solutions, LLC, as a corporate executive retreat. You've been living in corporate housing, Mr. Hayes. Rent-free, I might add. A taxable benefit you failed to declare for the past 4 years. The IRS will be very interested to hear about that. Preston's jaw went slack. He stared at the deed, at the familiar address, and the unfamiliar name of the owner. Verdant Solutions? What the hell is Verdant Solutions? I decided it was time for me to speak. It's my hobby, Preston, I said quietly. My little arts and crafts project. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a dawning horror. Eleanor continued, relentless. Next, the vehicles. She slid 2 more documents across the table. The Mercedes sedan you drive and the BMW convertible Ms. Chloe has been enjoying are both leased by Verdant Solutions as company cars. The leases are in the company's name. The insurance is in the company's name. As of my call to the leasing agency 1 hour ago, you are both no longer authorized drivers. They will be repossessed by the end of the day. Chloe let out a little gasp. My car? You can't take my car. It was never your car, Eleanor corrected her, not even bothering to look at her. Now, for the financials. She turned to a new section of the binder. Over the past 8 years, you have earned a substantial salary. However, your spending has been prodigious. The vacations, the expensive dinners, the gifts. She paused, and her eyes flickered towards Chloe for a millisecond. You've been living a lifestyle that, I'm afraid, was largely subsidized. The joint accounts you shared with my client were consistently supplemented by large cash infusions from Verdant Solutions to cover household expenses. She tapped a spreadsheet. According to the prenup, you are each entitled to half of the assets acquired during the marriage that are not protected as separate business holdings. My client's business and all its holdings are, of course, entirely separate. So, the marital property consists of the remaining balance in your joint checking account, which is currently $1,842, and the contents of your personal 401k. She looked at him. After 8 years of marriage to a woman you believed was financially dependent on you, your share of the marital estate comes to approximately $47,000 to be generous. Your lawyer will receive my full financial disclosure this afternoon. Preston finally crumpled. He sank into one of the dining room chairs, my company's chair, and put his head in his hands. The silence was broken only by his ragged breathing. Chloe, however, wasn't finished. The reality of her situation was crashing down on her, and she was panicking. She turned to me, her face a mess of confusion and fury. "This is crazy," she sputtered. "You can't own all this. You just make boxes. Preston is the successful one. He's the investment banker." I looked at my stepsister, the girl who had stolen my husband and tried to steal my mother's necklace, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. I pulled out my phone, opened an app, and placed it on the table in front of her. It was the real-time valuation of my privately held company, prepared by an independent firm for our upcoming move to go public. The number glowed on the screen. $9.5 million. Chloe stared at it. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The number was impossible. It didn't compute with the narrative she had built in her head, the one where I was the pathetic, hobbyist wife and she was the brilliant, ambitious woman who had won the real prize. Preston lifted his head. He looked at the phone screen. I saw the last bit of fight go out of him, replaced by a hollow, vacant look of utter defeat. "But how?" he whispered, his voice a ghost. "You were so busy looking down on my work, you never bothered to actually look at it," I said. "You were so confident in your own superiority, you couldn't imagine I was building an empire right under your nose." Eleanor closed her binder with a sharp, final snap. "So, to reiterate," she said, her voice now holding the crisp finality of a judge's gavel. "You have 24 hours to vacate this property. You will leave the keys on the counter. You will take only your personal belongings. Anything else will be considered theft. Is that understood?" Preston just nodded, a broken man. Chloe finally found her voice again, a desperate, pleading whine. She looked at Preston. "Preston? Do something. You promised. You promised me this life." He didn't even look at her. He just stared into the middle distance, his billion-dollar world shrunk down to a single, humiliating number on a phone screen. I looked at Chloe, and I almost felt sorry for her. "He promised you someone else's assets," I said, my voice soft. "Rookie mistake. You should always verify ownership before you commit to a hostile takeover." Their departure was as pathetic as their reign had been arrogant. They didn't take the full 24 hours. By that evening, they were gone. I watched from the upstairs window as they loaded clothes and boxes into the back of Chloe's friend's beat-up sedan. The 2 gleaming company cars were already gone, repossessed just as Eleanor had promised. They didn't talk. They just moved with the grim, joyless efficiency of defeated soldiers. Chloe shot one last hateful glare up at the house before getting in the car. It was the look of someone who had been robbed of something she never actually owned. The aftermath was swift and brutal, just as Operation Nightingale had been designed to be. The news of Preston's spectacular divorce and financial ruin spread through Austin's tight-knit business community like wildfire. His firm, embarrassed by the scandal and concerned about his misrepresentation of his financial status, placed him on indefinite leave. No one wanted an investment banker who had been so thoroughly outplayed in his own home. He was a joke. His career was over. Chloe was quietly let go from her position a week later. It turned out that sleeping with a senior partner who then becomes the subject of a massive, humiliating scandal wasn't great for an analyst's career prospects. They moved into Chloe's tiny, one-bedroom apartment on the other side of town, the one she had been so desperate to escape. The divorce was finalized in record time. Preston's lawyer, the same one who had drafted our ironclad prenup, advised him to take whatever settlement he could get. He tried to fight, to claim I had hidden assets, but Eleanor shut that down in court with brutal efficiency. "Your Honor," she said, "Mr. Hayes had access to all the same information my client did. He simply chose not to look at it. He was too busy dismissing his wife's hobby to notice she was building an empire." The judge, a woman who looked like she'd seen this movie 1,000 times, didn't even try to hide her smile. Preston walked away with half of the joint bank account and his 401k. It was just enough to cover his legal bills. The family fallout was just as messy. My father was heartbroken. He called me, his voice thick with shame and regret. "I'm so sorry, Audrey," he said. "I saw her jealousy, but I never imagined it could go this far. We talked for a long time, and I knew our relationship would survive." My stepmother, however, was a different story. She called me screaming, accusing me of ruining her daughter's life. "Chloe made a mistake," she shrieked. "She fell in love. You didn't have to destroy her." "She tried to destroy me," I replied calmly, "and she failed. I am done cleaning up her messes, and I am done with you enabling her." I hung up the phone, and with that click, I severed the final, toxic tie to that side of the family. It was a painful amputation, but a necessary one. As for Chloe and Preston? Their desperate alliance, built on greed and ego, crumbled without my money to hold it together. I heard through the grapevine that she left him within 2 months. She couldn't stand the real Preston, the one without the fancy house, the fast cars, and the unlimited credit card. Last I heard, she had moved back home with her mother, her grand ambitions reduced to bitter complaints on social media. 6 months after the divorce was final, Verdant Solutions went public. The IPO valued the company at $23 million. The day the stock opened, I sat in my newly redecorated home office, watching the ticker on my screen climb. There was no champagne, no celebration. Just a quiet, profound sense of peace. I had won. But more than that, I had survived. The next week, I bought a building. It was a downtown office tower that had recently come on the market because a major tenant, an investment firm, was downsizing and breaking their lease. It was Preston's old firm. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it was the perfect location for my next project. I've converted the top 3 floors into the Lily Gable Center for Entrepreneurship, a design incubator and co-working space for young women starting their own businesses. The centerpiece is the Lily Gable Scholarship, named for my mother, a substantial college fund designed to help talented young women who might otherwise be overlooked. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that morning in my kitchen. I think about Chloe in my robe and Preston explaining my new, pathetic reality. They thought they were so powerful. They thought they held all the cards. They never understood that true power isn't about what you can take from someone else. It's about what you can build for yourself. He tried to put me in a box, a little hobby box he could control. He never realized I was the one designing the whole world outside of it. Thank you so much for listening to my story all the way to the end. It means the world to me to be able to share it. So many of us have faced betrayal from the very people who were supposed to love us, and it's important to know you're not alone. My question for you is, what's one piece of advice you would give to someone who is just starting to rebuild their life after a major setback? I would love to read your wisdom in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support truly helps.